Michigan, 2007. A cold case that haunted a small community for nearly 2 decades has finally been solved. Cassandra Elise Monroe, a 38-year-old pediatric nurse, was the heart of her neighborhood, known for her gentle care and tireless work with sick children. But one chilly October evening, she vanished without a trace. Her car was found idling by a park trail, the driver's door open, her purse inside. Despite desperate searches and a community clinging to hope, leads dried up. Years passed. Rumors swirled. Nothing stuck. The case turned cold. Now, in a stunning twist, a recent DNA breakthrough has led to an unexpected arrest, rattling a quiet town all over again. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. In the heart of Dearborn, Michigan, nestled among maple-lined streets and 2-story homes with porch swings and flower beds, lived a woman who quietly carried an entire community on her shoulders. Cassandra Elise Monroe was 38 years old, a pediatric nurse with 14 years of experience at St. John's Children's Hospital. She had become more than just a medical professional. She was a thread woven into the fabric of the neighborhood's everyday life. Each morning, Cassandra left her modest white colonial at precisely 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand, hair neatly tied back, scrubs always ironed. Her neighbors would often wave from their porches, and kids on bicycles would slow to say hi. Cassandra remembered birthdays. She dropped off casseroles to new moms and handwrote sympathy cards when someone lost a grandparent. At the hospital, she stayed late to sit with frightened children, sometimes reading them bedtime stories when their parents couldn't be there. To the outside world, Cassandra's life was quiet, almost unremarkable. But to the people around her, she was a sanctuary, a person who gave more than she ever asked for. Her older sister Marion once described her as the kind of woman who would give you her last breath and tell you to keep going. They spoke daily, often over tea at Cassandra's place or during long phone calls that drifted into midnight. She had no children of her own, no partner at the time, and rarely spoke about her past relationships. Cassandra kept her world small and close, pouring all her energy into the children she treated, her aging mother, and the tight circle of people who loved her. There were no red flags, no drama, no enemies. Still, those closest to her noticed something different in the final weeks leading up to her disappearance. She had seemed more tired than usual. Not physically ill, just distant. Sometimes she stared off during conversations, her words trailing. Marion chalked it up to stress, maybe burnout. Cassandra brushed it off with a soft laugh and a promise to rest more. She had recently picked up a few extra shifts, helping cover for a coworker on maternity leave. It wasn't unusual. Cassandra always stepped up when others couldn't, but it added to the weariness in her eyes. Even so, she remained dependable, kind, and always exactly where she said she'd be. In mid-October 2007, the Michigan air turned crisp. Trees burned orange and red along the sidewalks, and kids bundled up in hoodies and jackets. Cassandra carved pumpkins with her neighbors' children and helped organize a small fundraiser at the hospital. By all accounts, it was a normal month in a life filled with giving. On the evening of October 17th, Cassandra was expected at the hospital for an evening shift. When she didn't show up and didn't call, concern rippled quickly through both her coworkers and her family. That single missed shift would become the trigger for something none of them were prepared for. In the days to come, search parties would form. Flyers would cover telephone poles. Tears would be shed by people who didn't even know her well, because somehow Cassandra had left a mark on nearly everyone. But in these quiet, final days before her disappearance, there was no warning. No sense of what was coming. What kind of darkness could possibly find its way into a life so gentle, so unassuming, so good? October 17, 2007 began like any other day for Cassandra Elise Monroe. She made her usual morning call to her sister Marion, chatting briefly about their mother's upcoming doctor's appointment and a patient at the hospital who had just returned from surgery. Cassandra mentioned she'd be working an evening shift, covering for a nurse whose child had the flu. There was no urgency in her voice, no anxiety, just the calm, measured tone of someone who had a routine and stuck to it. By 4:00 p.m., Cassandra was expected at St. John Hospital's Children's Wing. Her colleagues assumed she might be running late. At 5:15, when she still hadn't arrived, a few nurses texted her. No reply. By 6:00 p.m., voicemail. No answer. It was unlike her. Cassandra was never late and never without communication. By 9 p.m., the worry had solidified into fear. Her phone continued to ring out. She didn't return messages. She hadn't been seen at home, at the hospital, or by any friends or neighbors. At 11:47 p.m., Marion walked into the Dearborn Police Department and filed a missing persons report. At sunrise, officers on patrol made a chilling discovery. Cassandra's silver Toyota Corolla was found parked at Bell Creek Park, just off a narrow, winding access road that led into a secluded area of woods. The engine was still warm. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. Her cell phone sat on the passenger seat, her purse neatly placed beside it. The car showed no signs of damage. No broken glass, no blood. The keys were still in the ignition. To the untrained eye, it looked like she had stepped out for a walk and would return any moment. But she didn't. As news of her disappearance spread, dozens of volunteers from the hospital, the neighborhood, and nearby towns gathered at the park. Police brought in search dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging drones. The thick autumn canopy made aerial scans difficult, and recent rains had turned much of the forest floor to mud. Yet oddly, there were no visible footprints leading away from the vehicle. Searchers combed the trails, waterways, and even storm drains. Officers questioned joggers, hikers, and anyone who had been near the park that evening. No one reported seeing Cassandra. No one had heard a scream. No suspicious vehicles were noted in the area. The eerie calm of the scene only deepened the mystery. Detectives began retracing her movements that day. Surveillance footage showed her leaving a grocery store around 3:30 p.m., smiling as she carried a small bag, likely her dinner for the shift. Her route from the store to the hospital should have taken her nowhere near Bell Creek Park. It wasn't on the way. It wasn't a shortcut. And Cassandra wasn't known to frequent the area. Why had she stopped there? Had she been followed? Had she planned to meet someone? Was she lured there under false pretenses? For Marion, the lack of answers was paralyzing. She stood near the police barricade that morning, staring at her sister's car, trying to imagine any scenario that made sense. None did. The officers tapped into traffic cameras, cell tower pings, and local business surveillance, hoping for a thread. But no new information surfaced. And as the sun set over the empty trails that evening, it became painfully clear. Cassandra Elise Monroe had vanished. But if she didn't leave on her own, then who or what was she meeting in that park? 4 days after Cassandra Elise Monroe disappeared, hope was slipping through the fingers of everyone who loved her. Volunteers were growing exhausted, their flashlights dimmer with each passing night. Flyers began to wrinkle under the morning dew, and the media, once buzzing, had already turned its eye elsewhere. But on the morning of October 21st, a jogger named Dave Harkins, running his usual route near a wooded embankment just 2 miles from Bell Creek Park, noticed something odd, a faint shimmer beneath the leaves off the trail. At first he thought it was a piece of litter, maybe a discarded wrapper or a soda can reflecting the sun. But as he approached, he saw the edge of a plastic ID badge. Curiosity turned to dread. Brushing away the layers of fallen leaves and damp soil, he uncovered the hospital ID of Cassandra Monroe. Her face stared up at him, smiling from behind cracked plastic. Panicked, he called 911. Within the hour, the area was cordoned off. Police, forensic teams, and dogs flooded the scene. Just 15 feet from the badge, partially hidden beneath carefully placed branches and forest debris, they found her body. Cassandra lay on her side, her limbs awkwardly positioned, as if someone had attempted to conceal her but had done so hastily. The surrounding foliage had been disturbed, but only slightly, suggesting someone familiar with the woods and careful not to leave a trail. Her clothes were intact, her purse was missing, and her shoes were scuffed as though she had been dragged. The medical examiner arrived within hours. Cassandra had suffered a single devastating blow to the side of her head. Her wristwatch, found still strapped to her left arm, had stopped at 6:42 p.m. That became the assumed time of death. No defensive wounds were found on her hands or arms, leading investigators to believe she may have been caught off guard or struck from behind. There were no signs of sexual assault. No evidence of a robbery. Her earrings remained, as did a silver bracelet gifted to her by her sister. Her phone, previously found in her car, hadn't been used. Nothing about the scene fit a traditional pattern. The brutality of the act, paired with its clinical efficiency, raised more questions than it answered. For the Monroe family, the discovery crushed the sliver of hope they had clung to. Marion collapsed into the arms of a detective upon confirmation of the body. Their mother, unable to bear the news, was hospitalized with stress-related complications. Grief blanketed the family in a suffocating fog. The community rallied in mourning. Vigils were held on the hospital steps where candles flickered beneath photos of Cassandra, cradling infants and comforting terminal patients. Former patients left teddy bears and handwritten letters. "She saved my son's life," read one. "She was our angel," said another. Yet as the community grieved, police found themselves spinning in circles. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no indication of who had lured Cassandra to that isolated stretch of woods, or why. She had no enemies, no secrets, no known romantic relationships at the time. Her life had been transparent and pure, marked by selflessness and routine. And that's what made the crime even more chilling. This wasn't a woman living on the edge or involved in anything dangerous. She was, by every measure, good. The detectives gathered around a board, now filled with maps, timelines, and blurry surveillance stills. The crime scene was processed, the body autopsied. But one question hung like fog in the precinct. Who would murder a woman so loved and leave no trace of who they were? In the days following the discovery of Cassandra Elise Monroe's body, the investigation moved at a frantic pace. The Dearborn Police Department, under immense public pressure, threw every available resource into the case. Dozens of officers worked around the clock. Tip lines were manned day and night. Flyers with Cassandra's photo now bore the chilling words, "Homicide investigation. Tips needed." Detectives began with the most logical leads, those closest to her. Hospital staff were questioned one by one. Cassandra's co-workers described her as dependable, deeply kind, and someone who rarely let her guard down. A few noted she had seemed tired lately, even distracted, but none could point to a specific problem or person of concern. A nurse remembered a heated exchange between Cassandra and a parent a few months earlier. The man, whose child had been denied an early discharge, had reportedly raised his voice. Police tracked him down. He was cooperative. Alibi verified. Then came the name of a former hospital custodian, Dennis Ray Haskins. He had been let go after a series of HR complaints, including one about inappropriate comments made to female staff. Cassandra had reportedly filed one of those complaints. He became a person of interest. Police questioned him. He denied any animosity. He lived over an hour away and claimed he was home the night of the murder. His story checked out, or so it seemed at the time. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured every piece of evidence from the scene. Cassandra's clothes, her badge, the leaves beneath her body, anything that could hold a trace. But the crime had been clean. No foreign DNA, no fingerprints, no hair. Even the vehicle showed no signs of forced entry or tampering. Frustration set in. Hundreds of tips poured into the hotline. Some came from genuine concern. Others were driven by speculation or the desire for attention. One woman claimed she saw a man dragging something through the woods near the park, but her timeline didn't match. Another tip alleged Cassandra had been secretly dating someone from out of town. Police searched her phone and computer. No evidence supported the claim. Out of desperation, detectives turned to criminal profilers and, controversially, even psychics. One psychic claimed Cassandra had been taken by someone she knew. Another suggested a hidden object, like a ring, would hold the killer's energy. Officers followed every lead, no matter how far-fetched. Winter arrived. Snow blanketed Bell Creek Park, covering the ground where Cassandra had once laid. With the physical scene now buried and most leads exhausted, momentum stalled. News stations that had once camped outside the police department quietly pulled their crews. Cassandra's case slowly faded from headlines. Inside the precinct, whiteboards once filled with fresh theories now held smudged notes and red string that led nowhere. The task force began to shrink. Hours were cut, detectives reassigned. And yet something continued to nag at lead investigator Detective Mira Torres. A feeling that something had been missed, something small, maybe seemingly irrelevant but crucial. A detail buried beneath the chaos of those early days. Had they been too quick to dismiss certain suspects? Had the crime scene held more than they realized? As the investigation dragged deeper into winter, and the trail grew colder with each snowfall, the team faced an unspoken truth. They had someone's name in that file, somewhere in those notes, somewhere in that first chaotic wave of interviews. But they didn't know it yet. What vital clue had been overlooked in the noise of panic and grief? By the spring of 2010, 3 years after the brutal murder of Cassandra Elise Monroe, the reality set in like a slow, bitter winter. The investigation had gone quiet. What once occupied the front pages of local newspapers now lived in a single battered file box, marked Monroe, C. Homicide 2007. Inside that box were notes from interviews, photographs of the scene, timelines, and the original crime scene report. Her watch, still stopped at 6:42 p.m., was sealed in an evidence bag alongside her blood-stained scrubs and hospital ID. The forensic testing was complete. All leads had been exhausted. There were no suspects in custody. No movement. No justice. The case was officially labeled inactive. Detective Mira Torres, who had once spearheaded the investigation, was reassigned to a robbery task force. Her bulletin board, once filled with Cassandra's photos and maps, had been cleared. A single Polaroid of Cassandra, smiling in her scrubs, remained pinned to the corner. Faded, forgotten by most, but not by everyone, because outside the precinct walls, Cassandra's name still echoed, spoken softly in homes, whispered at hospital corridors, remembered in grief. Her sister Marion refused to let the case go cold in her heart. Every month, without fail, she called the precinct asking for updates. She attended city council meetings to demand resources for cold cases. She wrote letters to elected officials. She became a quiet but relentless advocate, not just for Cassandra, but for all families still waiting. She also took to the internet. On online message boards and true crime forums, Marion shared Cassandra's story with anyone who would listen. She uploaded photos, details of the case, theories, and timelines. Sometimes strangers replied with support. Other times, cruel comments appeared, accusing Cassandra of secrets she never had. But Marion didn't stop. Her sister deserved to be more than a headline that had faded into dust. The community, too, remembered. Cassandra's former patients, now teenagers, visited her grave and left crayon drawings, letters, and stuffed animals. One note, written by a young girl named Maya, read, "Thank you for making me feel brave when I was scared. I miss you." The hospital created a scholarship in Cassandra's name for students entering pediatric nursing. Each year the ceremony was quiet but emotional. And each year Marion spoke, her voice cracking as she repeated a single phrase, "We haven't forgotten." But as the years dragged on, the silence grew heavier. Leads dried up. Detectives retired. Technology advanced, but without new evidence or DNA matches, there was little incentive to revisit the case. By 2020, only a handful of cold cases were re-examined each year. Cassandra's wasn't one of them, until 2023. That spring, a newly formed statewide cold case task force in Michigan began reviewing cases involving unsolved violent crimes with potential DNA evidence. Funded through a federal grant, the task force prioritized files with preserved biological materials in cases where new forensic tools could be applied. Cassandra Monroe's name surfaced in a database search. Her case was flagged. The evidence, still sealed, still intact, was transferred to the Michigan State Police Forensic Laboratory for reanalysis using modern touch DNA and genealogical mapping techniques. For the first time in over a decade, someone opened her file with fresh eyes, and for the first time in 16 years, the silence began to break. What new technology, what overlooked detail, would finally stir life into a case long buried in memory and grief? It was a nondescript Monday morning in February 2023, when the sealed evidence box labeled Monroe C was placed on an examination table inside the Michigan State Police Forensic Science Division. The cold case task force, established just months prior, was sifting through dozens of dormant files across the state. But something about Cassandra's case stood out. Her evidence was intact, carefully preserved. The clothing, the badge, and the forensic samples had been kept in a temperature-controlled facility, untouched for over a decade. With the rapid advancement of DNA technology, even the smallest biological traces could now yield powerful answers. Leading the renewed examination was forensic analyst Olivia Kearns, a veteran in cold case DNA recovery. She zeroed in on one item in particular, Cassandra's hospital ID badge, It had been discovered half-buried just feet from her body. In 2007, it had been processed using the standard DNA methods of the time, methods that required larger samples and weren't sensitive enough to detect what we now call touch DNA, the microscopic traces left behind from skin contact alone. Using state-of-the-art extraction techniques, Olivia focused on the badge's plastic clip. With meticulous care, she swabbed the grooves where the clip would have been frequently handled. Under magnification, she located a potential biological sample, a residue barely visible to the naked eye. The swab was amplified and uploaded into the combined DNA index system, CODIS. Days passed, then weeks. The analysts waited, and then it happened. A partial familial match pinged in the database. The DNA didn't belong to a known felon, but it was close enough to someone who did. A man named Craig Haskins, convicted of aggravated assault in Indiana in 2011, shared a familial DNA profile with the unknown contributor found on Cassandra's badge. The team launched into a genealogical investigation. If the DNA wasn't Craig's, whose was it? Enter genealogist consultants, experts trained in tracing family trees through public records, ancestry databases, and genetic connections. Using Craig's known profile and mapping it through a web of relatives, one name emerged again and again: Dennis Ray Haskins, Craig's cousin. The surname wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was in Cassandra's original case file. Dennis had once worked maintenance at St. John's Hospital. He had been let go in 2006 following complaints of inappropriate behavior. Cassandra had filed one of those complaints. He was briefly questioned in 2007 but cleared when he provided an alibi and had no criminal record at the time. But DNA doesn't forget. The discovery sent shockwaves through the cold case unit. They revisited Dennis Haskins' original interview. It was short, unremarkable. He had claimed to be home on the night of Cassandra's murder. That claim was never verified beyond a roommate's statement, who has since moved out of state and couldn't be located for follow-up. With this new lead, detectives obtained a legal warrant for Dennis's DNA. They followed procedure: quiet surveillance, discreet collection. A discarded coffee cup provided the final piece. When his DNA was processed and compared against the sample recovered from Cassandra's badge, the match was conclusive. Dennis Ray Haskins had touched Cassandra's hospital badge. He was now the prime suspect in a murder that had haunted Dearborn for nearly 2 decades. But DNA alone doesn't always convict. Investigators now had to build the case from fragments, asking the most crucial question yet: would this evidence, however powerful, be enough to finally connect Dennis to Cassandra's death and prove he was the one who took her life that night in 2007, March 14, 2024? Just after 6 a.m., the quiet of a residential street in Flint, Michigan, was broken by the low hum of unmarked police vehicles. Neighbors peeked through curtains as law enforcement surrounded a modest 1-story home on the corner of Oakwood Lane. Moments later, the front door opened and a man stepped outside in sweatpants and a faded hoodie. He was calm, even as detectives moved in. Dennis Ray Haskins, 49 years old, unemployed, and previously unknown to most of his neighbors, was arrested without incident. To the outside world, Dennis had always been unremarkable. He mowed his lawn, nodded politely to others, and kept mostly to himself. He had no criminal record in Michigan, no visible signs of trouble. But inside that quiet existence lay secrets long buried. At the precinct, Dennis was read his rights and questioned in connection with the 2007 murder of Cassandra Elise Monroe. When asked if he knew her, he shook his head. "I don't know anyone by that name," he said. His voice was steady, unemotional. Detectives presented the DNA evidence recovered from Cassandra's hospital badge, evidence that had gone untouched for 16 years. Dennis appeared unfazed. He claimed he had no idea how his DNA ended up there. "I've worked around a lot of people," he said. "That doesn't mean I killed her." But investigators weren't only armed with DNA. As the task force dug deeper, they uncovered more troubling connections. Dennis had worked maintenance at St. John's Hospital in 2007 for approximately 6 months. HR files showed he had been reprimanded twice for inappropriate comments toward staff, including Cassandra. One of those complaints came just weeks before he was terminated. Dennis's employee record had been pulled during the initial 2007 investigation, but with no criminal record and a shaky but technically confirmed alibi, he had been dismissed early on. But this time, investigators weren't stopping there. In a search of Dennis's home, detectives recovered old journals and loose papers from a storage box in his basement. Among them, a page torn from a notebook bore Cassandra's name, first name only, written several times in varying handwriting. Another note contained the address of the hospital, along with the phrase, "She thinks I'm nothing." It was not a confession, but it painted a picture. Neighbors were stunned. "Dennis?" said one elderly woman. "He was quiet, helped me carry my groceries once." Another neighbor described him as distant, always looking over his shoulder. "He didn't talk much. Kind of gave you a weird feeling, but not dangerous. Just off." The news of his arrest traveled fast. Marion Monroe received the call just after 7:30 a.m. After years of phone calls, false starts, and silence, the words hit her like a wave. "We've made an arrest." She wept, and then she sat in silence, staring out the window of her mother's home, trying to grasp what justice might even look like after all this time. The community, too, was rattled. For years, people had asked how someone could kill a woman as kind and unassuming as Cassandra and vanish without consequence. Now, they were learning that the man responsible may have been living just 2 hours away, unnoticed, unbothered, and unsuspected. But despite the arrest, questions remained. What was the motive? Was it premeditated? How had he convinced everyone, including detectives, that he was just another name in a file? Now, as the case moved from the precinct to the courtroom, all eyes turned to the next phase of the journey. What truths would the court uncover about the night Cassandra vanished, and would justice finally be within reach? In October 2024, nearly 17 years after Cassandra Elise Monroe's murder, the trial of Dennis Ray Haskins commenced in the Wayne County Circuit Court. The courtroom buzzed with emotion and anticipation. Every seat was filled. Former patients of Cassandra, now young adults, sat beside grieving family members. Nurses from St. John's wore blue ribbons in her memory. The air was heavy, not just with sorrow, but with the weight of a long-awaited reckoning. The prosecution opened with precision. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Vega laid out the foundation of their case: opportunity, proximity, history, and science. Dennis had access to the hospital, a documented pattern of inappropriate behavior, and most importantly, his DNA was found on Cassandra's hospital badge, discovered feet from her body. Vega detailed the timeline. Dennis worked at St. John's in 2007. He was terminated weeks before Cassandra's murder after receiving multiple complaints, including one from Cassandra herself. Cell tower data from that night, though limited, placed Dennis in the general area of Bell Creek Park. His alibi, previously accepted in 2007, now unraveled under scrutiny. His old roommate, previously the only person to vouch for him, could not be located. No other witness could confirm Dennis's whereabouts during the time of Cassandra's disappearance. The defense countered aggressively. Public defender Alan Marcus claimed the DNA evidence was circumstantial and could have been the result of workplace transfer. "He worked maintenance," Marcus said. "Of course his DNA could be on a nurse's badge. That doesn't make him a killer." Marcus also pointed to the lack of physical evidence tying Dennis directly to the scene. No blood, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses. "There's no murder weapon, no confession, just a badge and a theory," he argued. But the prosecution wasn't finished. They called a former hospital co-worker to the stand, a nurse named Carla Brent, who testified that Dennis often lingered in Cassandra's unit, watching her from the hallway. "It made us uncomfortable," she said. "He wasn't assigned to our wing, but he'd find excuses to come by, fix a vent, check a light, always near her." Then came a key moment, the introduction of Dennis's recovered notebook. Inside were disjointed writings, names, phrases, addresses. One page bore Cassandra's first name over and over. Another page read, "She thinks I'm invisible, but I'll show her I'm not." While the defense argued the writings were vague and not criminal in themselves, the jury listened intently. The emotional impact was undeniable. Weeks passed. Marion testified on the stand, her voice cracking as she recalled the call from police, the sleepless nights, the years of unanswered questions. She never hurt anyone, she said. She gave her life to helping children. She didn't deserve this. The prosecution rested, and the courtroom fell into stillness. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On the morning of November 17, 2024, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. Dennis Ray Haskins was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. No apology, no reaction. Outside the courthouse, tears flowed. Hugs were shared between strangers. A sense of closure hovered in the air, but it was not complete. Justice, while served, could not fill the space Cassandra once occupied. For Marion, the verdict was both a triumph and a burden. "I'm grateful," she said to reporters, "but this doesn't bring her back. It doesn't undo the pain." Even with a conviction secured, the community was left to grapple with a difficult question. What does justice truly look like when a life so good is taken so senselessly? And can a courtroom verdict ever be enough to make it whole? Cassandra Elise Monroe was never meant to be a headline or a face on a flyer. She was meant to live a quiet life defined by compassion, not tragedy. Yet in the years following her death, and especially after the long-awaited arrest and conviction of her killer, her name became something more, a symbol of perseverance, of justice delayed but not denied, and of the quiet power one life can hold. Her legacy first took root in the place she loved most, St. John's Children's Hospital. A few months after the trial, the hospital unveiled the Cassandra Monroe Healing Garden, a space filled with lilies, soft benches, wind chimes, and a curved path lined with hand-painted stones bearing the names of children she once treated. Staff, patients, and volunteers gathered to dedicate the space. Many wept, others smiled through tears, remembering the woman who brought coloring, books to chemotherapy appointments, and read bedtime stories to children too scared to sleep. Her name now lives on in an annual scholarship for nursing students who demonstrate not only academic excellence but a deep commitment to pediatric care. One of the first recipients, a young woman named Kira James, said in her acceptance speech, "I never met Cassandra, but I want to be the kind of nurse she was, the kind that changes, lives just by showing up with love." But the legacy of Cassandra's case extended beyond the walls of the hospital. The wake of Dennis Ray Haskins' conviction, Michigan lawmakers pushed for reforms in how cold cases are handled. Cassandra's case was cited in hearings as an example of what can happen when early evidence is preserved and technology is used to its fullest potential. In 2025, the state launched the Monroe Initiative, a program designed to reprocess DNA evidence from unsolved homicides using modern touch DNA and familial genealogy techniques. Already, the initiative has led to breakthroughs in other cases, some dating back to the 1990s. For families who had long since stopped hoping, Cassandra's story gave them reason to believe again. Marion Monroe, once a grieving sister with nowhere to turn, has become a fierce advocate for victims' families. She now speaks at cold case conferences and supports others walking the long road she knows all too well. Her voice, once choked by grief, is now strong, steady, and unrelenting. "If Cassandra taught me anything," she often says, "it's that giving up is never an option." The town of Dearborn, too, began to heal in subtle ways. Residents who once whispered about the case in fear now speak of it with a quiet reverence. Cassandra became more than a victim. She became a reminder that even in darkness, light can be found through courage, persistence, and love. Still, for those closest to her, the wound remains. A conviction brings accountability, but not erasure. A sentence brings consequence, but not peace. The ache of what was lost. The future Cassandra never lived. The children she never cared for. The memories that will never be made remain sharp, and yet, healing has begun. In every nurse who chooses compassion over convenience. In every cold case reopened because someone refused to stop asking questions. In every child who finds hope in a hospital garden, Cassandra's story will never be forgotten. Not because of how she died, but because of how she lived. But even as her legacy grows, One haunting question still lingers in the quiet moments. How do you truly heal a wound that stayed open for 17 years? Cassandra Elise Monroe's story is not just about a crime. It's about what survives in the wake of it. A pediatric nurse, a caregiver, a sister, and a friend, she spent her life giving comfort to those who needed it most. And when her life was violently taken, it left a wound that would take 17 years to begin to heal. For nearly 2 decades, the 2007 Michigan cold case loomed like a shadow over her family and her community. Leads went cold. Hope grew dim. But one voice never wavered, her sister Marion. She became Cassandra's echo in the world, pushing through silence, red tape, and heartbreak to ensure her sister's name never disappeared. In 2024, that persistence met progress. With the aid of advanced DNA technology and dedicated investigators, the truth finally surfaced. Dennis Ray Haskins' arrest and conviction proved that no matter how much time passes, justice can still find its way. But Cassandra's story goes beyond one verdict. It sparked legislative reform, reopened cold case files, and breathed life into stalled investigations across Michigan. Her name now lives on in scholarships, memorials, and the countless lives she touched, both in life and after death. Cassandra reminds us that even when justice is delayed, it is not always denied. Let her memory remind us the truth does not forget, and neither should we.